Hey, you guys, gals, and bums, and welcome back to A Few Bad Men. All right. His nickname was Angel. Some saw him as a pipsqueak, others a psychotic killer. To the police, he was the leader of a brutal Southside Chicago street gang. To his followers, he was a hero and a holy man. To the U.S. government, he was a terrorist. And his mother described him as a loving son who was just a little confused. Those are some of the things said about Jeff Fort, the quiet yet charismatic leader of the Rukn and founder of the Black Stone Rangers. Ann and John Lee Fort left the cotton fields of Aberdeen, Mississippi, and moved their 10 kids to Chicago in 1955. After living at 22nd Street in Cottage Grove, the family moved to a red brick building at 6536 South Blackstone Avenue in the Woodlawn section of Chicago. Young Jeff spent most of his time in the streets and was rarely in school. He was enrolled in Hyde Park High, but he hardly ever showed up, and by the time he was 15, he had dropped out completely. Jeff was functionally illiterate, and some feel he suffered from dyslexia. Despite that, and despite only growing to 4'9", Jeff was a charismatic and natural leader. In 1959, he was sent to the St. Charles Juvenile Detention Center, where he became friends with another young hood named Eugene Bull Hairston. Now, I don't know if they met in the facility or not. Some sources say that the Hairston and the Fort families had been friends for years, but I don't know. Street gangs were the in thing in Chicago around 1960. So when Jeff got home, he and a few friends followed the same path as the Vice Lords, who also began in St. Charles and started a street gang. They called themselves the Black Stone Rangers. The Black Stone Rangers claimed 64th Street to 66th Street along Blackstone Avenue as their turf. The gang at first was just a group of kids who specialized in purse snatching and small-time burglaries. Soon, they would grow into the most organized street gang in Chicago with a structure similar to the Chicago outfit. The Woodlawn neighborhood had begun to integrate in the 1940s, and by 1960, many of the families that made up the predominantly Irish neighborhood had moved out, but many had not. The kids of those who stayed created gangs to protect the areas still considered white areas from black kids. The parks, pools, and shopping centers were considered white areas. Black kids went to these places at their own peril. Oftentimes, they faced harassment or violence from the residents or the police. As more black residents moved into the neighborhood, they were watched closer by police and questioned more frequently whenever a crime was committed without just cause. When fights between black and white gangs happened, the police would not arrest the whites, but they often brutally arrested the blacks involved. When Eugene Bull Hairston came home from St. Charles, he and a few of his friends started their own gang, called the Harper's Boys. Harper Street was the next block over from Blackstone Avenue, and the Harper's Boys turf was from 63rd to 64 along Harper. Bull was 3 years older than Jeff, and his family had moved to Chicago in 1955 from Ohio. Eugene was the cousin of Leonard Cal Calloway, one of the 7 men who created the Vice Lords. The Blackstone Rangers and the Harper's Boys fought other gangs in the areas, the Egyptian Cobras to the west and the Devil's Disciples to the north. And even though Jeff and Bull were close friends, that didn't stop their 2 gangs from fighting each other. When a Harper named Carl Robinson was shot with a zip gun by a Blackstone, the beef intensified. He would survive, but the 2 groups fought each other even harder after that. This went on for a few months before the 2 groups decided to join forces. They kept the name Blackstone Rangers, and Bull Hairston was named as the leader, and Jeff was his second in command. Bull was the muscle, and Fort was the brains. Bull had connections with older syndicate gangsters. These gangsters controlled the neighborhood drug dealers, pimps, illegal gambling operators, ran numbers, and fenced stolen goods. The Blackstone Rangers were used by the syndicate to keep the drug dealers, pimps, and other criminals in line. If a white customer was robbed or worse, when he came into the neighborhood to buy drugs, that drew the attention of the cops. They made sure that only the right dealers and pimps made money from the Stony Island Avenue strip. The older gangsters also used the young gang members as drug couriers, number runners, enforcers, and even hitmen. The older syndicate intentionally chose gang members under 17 to commit murders because they could not be tried as adults. It was these older gangsters who handed down the no snitching rule, not out of some sense of honor, but as a way to protect themselves from prosecution. Young kids and their families were threatened or killed if the rules were broken. It was the Black Syndicate that placed Bull at the head of the gang and Jeff as the second in command. They called them the Big Chief and the Little Chief. Now for context, all this is happening over a few months to a year. By the end of 1960, the Blackstone Rangers had expanded and flipped many smaller gangs into Rangers. The gang, which started with around 200 guys, now numbered around 1,500 members spread throughout several sets. In 1961, Eugene Hairston, Lamar Bop Daddy Bell, Charles Rico Crenshaw, and other former Harper's Boys created the Main 21, the ruling body which laid out a set of bylaws and a constitution the Rangers had to live by. They chose the pyramid as their symbol, as well as the number 360. The four corners of the pyramid are four 390-degree angles that add up to 360 degrees, hence the 360. Each side of the pyramid had its own meaning representing earth, fire, air, and water. The pyramid was given 21 bricks to symbolize the ruling main 21, and they adopted the colors of red, black, and green. In 1961, both Jeff Fort and Bull Hairston were sent to juvenile detention. When they got out in '62, the gang had become the most powerful in the neighborhood, and its reputation spread to other neighborhoods. Henry Mickey Cogwell was the leader of a Cobra set in Inglewood, and he was connected to the Chicago outfit. When Mickey flipped from Cobra to Stone, he changed the name of his gang to the Cobra Stones. Mickey placed his stones in the Robert Taylor homes and used his outfit connections to flood the projects with heroin. In the summer of 1965, Ed Woods, director of the Woodlawn Chicago Boys Club, and Reverend O.H. Sotnak of the Woodlawn Emmanuel Lutheran Church at 1355 East 64th Street, heard that the Rangers were looking for a place to meet, and Reverend Sotnak volunteered his church. 180 kids met 3 nights a week to play basketball, pool, cards, ping pong, checkers, whatever, long as the kids stayed off the streets. They were allowed to organize dances, to raise money for a TV and a turntable and amplifier to play records. Wood used his status in the community to get jobs for some of the young men, and oftentimes they were hired right on the spot because of his recommendation. The younger kids from 9 to 15 met at the Boys Club at 6331 University Avenue. This didn't solve the gang problem in the neighborhood, but it gave a few guys a second chance to change their lives. Also in that year, Jeff Fort was approached by another pastor, Reverend John Fry, who had just become the new minister at the First Presbyterian Church at 6400 Kimbark Avenue in June of 1960. Fry reached out to the Blackstone Rangers and they met. He said that he wanted to help to stop the killing between the Stones and their rivals, the Devil's Disciples, and he offered his church. Fry hired 12 Stones, including Jeff Fort and Bull Hairston. He paid them $1.75 an hour for a 2-day intensive training session, as well as a 6-day work period. The team of Rangers painted several of the classrooms, the front hallway, and lobby of the church. Fry secured employment in other churches and private homes for many of them. But this relationship soon came under scrutiny. The Rangers met every Tuesday, Thursday, and Saturday, and the meetings were led by Hairston, the big chief. The church became a hangout for the gang, and the parties they threw in the gymnasium often turned wild, and the gang kept drugs and weapons hidden throughout the basement of the church. Some informants told the CPD that the gang held Fry hostage and would tie him up. He was supposedly deathly afraid of them and did whatever they told him to do. In '66, the Stones went on a brutal campaign of recruitment. In May and June, 16 kids were shot because they refused to join the Stones. Another 13 were stabbed or beaten. The Stones spread across the south side, the west side, and into the north side of Chicago. Auburn, Gresham, Chatham, Washington Heights, West Inglewood and the Cabrini Green projects, Grand Boulevard, the Ida B. Well homes, and even out to the southern suburbs of the city. By 1966, the Stone Nation was the name associated with all the individually run gangs who had flipped Stone. Jeff Fort also began to study Islam, and on December 28th, 1966, Fort proposed to Hairston the rebranding of the gang as the Black Peace Stone Rangers, or the Black Prince Stone Nation. Bull, too, was all for the Black Power movement, and he started encouraging Rangers to start wearing afros to show more Black pride. Hairston smoked a little weed and drank a little liquor, but he was against narcotics for personal use or for sale. Jeff Fort didn't smoke weed, drink, or even curse, so the new name was adopted. It was also around this time that Jeff became friends with civil rights leader Jesse Jackson. And Jackson supported the programs the Stones had created to help the community. They would remain friends into the 1970s, although Jackson downplayed his relationship during his run for president in 1988. The Black Power movement also sparked the birth of the Black Panther Party. When the Black Panther Party moved to Woodlawn, they clashed with the Stones. In December of 1968, the Rangers shot a Panther. Later that night, 12 Panthers and 5 Stones were arrested. All of them were armed. The two groups supposedly had a sit-down at the First Presbyterian Church. They went upstairs, and Jeff Fort tried to intimidate the Panthers by marching in 100 armed soldiers into the gym before removing his jacket and revealing a .45 and a shoulder holster. The Panthers were from the streets too, and they were not intimidated. The Black Panthers and other Black nationalist groups were seen by FBI Director J. Edgar Hoover as the biggest threat to the internal security of the country. The FBI created the COINTEL program, which sought to neutralize groups like the Panthers. The FBI got wind of the tension between the Stones and the Panthers and decided to add fuel to the fire. An anonymous letter was sent to Jeff Fort, and it read, "Brother Jeff, I've spent some time with some Panther friends on the west side lately, and I know what's going on. The brothers that run the Panthers blame you for blocking their thing, and there's supposed to be a hit out on you. I'm not a Panther or a Ranger, just black. From what I see, those Panthers are out for themselves, not black people. I think you ought to know what they're up to. I know what I'd do if I was you. You might hear from me again." At the same time, another letter was sent to Fred Hampton, Chicago's Panther Party leader. It read, "Just a word of warning. A Stone friend of mine tells me someone wants the Panthers and is looking for someone to get you out of the way. Brother Jeff is supposed to be interested. I'm just a black man looking for blacks working together, not more of this gangbanging." Eventually, the two groups would work out a truce and agreed to stay out of each other's way. It was through Reverend Fry that the Rangers got involved with the Woodlawn Organization. In 1967, the Woodlawn Organization received over $900,000 from the government to distribute to the gangs of Woodlawn to train young men for employment. 800 youths, mostly gang members, participated. The Woodlawn Organization paid $45 a week to trainees to take classes to become instructors. Bull, Fort, and many other Main 21 were paid $6,500 for the year. On September 12, 1967, Leo McClure, DeRocha Berrien, and Theodore Newsom, who was from California, were sitting in a car in front of 6125 Kenwood Avenue. Marvin Martin, 15, who was the president of the Conservative Rangers, was standing on the corner of Kenwood with his brother Dennis, 14, and another youth, also 14. Then Paul Martin, a high-ranking Stone, approached them, pointed to the car containing McClure and the others and said, "There's the car, hit it." 14-year-old Dennis Jackson approached the car and said to the men, "You're messing with the chief." And then shots rang out. Jackson fired 6 times into the car before running off yelling, "They was messing with the chief." Jackson and the others ran home. Hairston came by later with 2 other men. He had lunch meat, cheese, and orange juice. "Did we handle it?" Hairston asked. "Yeah, I shot each of them twice," Dennis said before asking them for the money. Hairston pulled out a $5 bill and a $1 bill. He told Dennis to keep $1 and to give $1 to everyone else in the apartment. When Dennis asked why it had to be done, Bull replied, "They were drug dealers who were making money from the neighborhood." The Jackson brothers and their friends were arrested, and they gave the police the whole story. Martin and Hairston were then arrested. The mother of the Jackson boys received a phone call from Reverend Fry saying if they tell on Bull, they will be killed. She was offered money to leave town and have the boys change their testimony. When she refused to leave, the lawyer that was given to the boys told her if they testified, Jeff Fort would kill them. None of the intimidation worked, and Bull Hairston was found guilty of soliciting murder and sentenced to 5 to 15 years in prison. Paul Martin was a former bartender and entertainer before he joined the gang in his 30s. He called himself the spiritual leader of the Black P. Stone Rangers. During his trial, he wore a preacher's collar and carried a Bible. It must have worked. He will be found not guilty. On April 21st, Martin and 19 other youths were arrested when the cops raided the Afro-American Youth Center at 1470 67th Street. The police found whiskey, marijuana, and 238s. Martin was charged with keeping a disorderly house, possession of narcotics, and contributing to the delinquency of minors. The charges would eventually be dropped. Jeff Fort and the Rangers took part in a memorial march on November 30th, 1968. They wanted to rename State Street in honor of a fallen gang chief, Jerome Cogwell, Mickey's brother. The police showed up and broke up the peaceful gathering, causing the Stones to fight back. Jeff and many of the other Stones were arrested and charged with mob activity. He would be sentenced to 6 months. By 1968, the Woodlawn Organization training program was a disaster. Fort and Hairston were locked up, and 3 of the Main 21 who were employed by the program were in jail for sexual assault. The program was a failure. The House Committee on Government Operations began an investigation, and they found out that most of the training centers were just a fraud. The guys spent most of their time smoking weed, drinking, and partying. Some on the payroll just showed up to falsify the time cards. On July 9, 1968, Jeff Fort was in front of the Senate Permanent Subcommittee on Investigations to answer questions about fraud in the program. He only spent 15 minutes at the witness table, only giving his name. When asked another question, his lawyer said that his client would not be answering any questions, unless the attorney was given the right to cross-examine all witnesses who had defamed Fort in previous testimony. He also demanded the right for Fort to confront his accusers and present his own evidence to the subcommittee. Senator McClellan said, "We cannot deprive your client of his freedoms. We are here to investigate. Your client was a center chief in an anti-poverty program drawing $6,000 a year in federal funds, and we are here investigating that program in which he participated. I'm going to insist that he answer. Jeff was asked again where he lived. His lawyer said, "I'm sorry, we cannot answer that question." Then, despite being warned that they would be charged with contempt, Jeff raised his right fist and he and his lawyer got up and walked out of the courtroom. Throughout the 5 days of testimony, the committee found cases of drug dealing, extortion, rape, bribery, and even murder. But it would take 4 years before Jeff would be held to account. On October 29, 1969, a 29-year-old postal employee named Travis Davis came out of a store at 1425 East 67th Street and saw 13-year-old Oliver Reed trying to steal a radio out of his car. He grabbed the kid and was dragging him into the store to call the police when Jeff Fort, Paul Martin, and several other Stones who witnessed this approached and attacked Davis. Fort and Martin were arrested for assault. Martin was once again found not guilty, but Fort, despite his claim of trying to save the boy from being strangled by the man, was found guilty. Free on bond, there was an internal beef between Jeff and some of the other leaders. When they approached him about contributing to a fund to get other members out of jail, Fort reportedly tossed a $1 bill and said, "That's enough for those blanks." The other Rangers told him, "That's it, brother, you're on your own." He supposedly hid out until June, when he would be sentenced to 6 months on a work farm for the assault. Paul Martin was arrested again for assaulting a woman. At a press conference, the 34-year-old told reporters he wanted to disavow himself from the Rangers. He said that the Rangers were undisciplined and that the young members didn't listen to the older members. He also said that Jeff Fort had threatened his life. 3 months later, on October 4th, 1969, he was walking down 67th Street wearing his usual uniform, a flowing purple robe, a black vest, and large circular silver earrings. He will be found shot on the sidewalk at 1506 East 67th Street, a half a block from the Stones headquarters, and pronounced dead at Billings Hospital. When the police told Ford about the shooting, he said that he may have unwittingly thrown him to the wolves when he kicked him out of the gang. In April of '68, after the assassination of Martin Luther King Jr., school officials thought it would be best to bus the white students from Mount Carmel High School in Woodlawn out of the neighborhood for their safety. After the 700 students were loaded onto the bus, they were surrounded by a large group of Stones who began to rock the buses. Out of nowhere, Jeff Ford appeared and raised his hand. They all stopped, did an about face, and left the school area. In February of '69, a court ordered that Jeff be placed in a federal youth institution for 60 days before being sentenced for contempt of Congress. Jeff Fort had become more than a gang leader. He had gained some level of respect in political circles. The activism the Chicago gangs were involved in, like free lunch programs and job training, did help some people, and the politicians took notice. They felt that the gang leaders and the gangs could be used as a force for positive change in the community, or at least help them get elected. In 1968, an Illinois politician sent an invitation to Jeff Fort to appear at the January 1969 presidential inauguration ball for President-elect Richard Nixon. Jeff Fort declined the offer, but sent Mickey Cogwell and Herman Moose Holmes, a Maine 21 leader, in his stead. The Stones by now had moved on from purse snatching and charging 50 cents to kids on their way to school. They were now using their strength and reputation to extort the local businesses under the L on 63rd Street and the high-end stores that catered to the wealthy in Hyde Park. They even tried to extort Daddy O Daly, the popular radio and TV personality who hosted the TV show for blacks only on Channel 7. He owned a few gas stations in a bowling alley at 87th and Cottage Grove Avenue. O'Daly said on his radio show that the Chicago gangs were engaged in widespread extortion against him and many other businesses. He set up a meeting of black community leaders and gang leaders, but none of the gangs showed up, and O'Daly's life was threatened. He asked for and received police protection. Even legendary personalities were not safe. In 1970, Jeff Fort, Mickey Cogwell, and Charles Rico Crenshaw paid Sammy Davis Jr. a visit in LA and demanded $150,000 in front money to start up a chain of clothing stores. Sammy refused. Now, why Sammy Davis, right? Well, Sammy Davis owned a liquor store and several shops in Stone territory in Chicago. He had become friends with some of the Stones through Mickey Cogwell's outfit connections, so this wasn't out of the blue. On June 8, 1970, Sammy was in Lake Geneva, Wisconsin, scheduled to perform at the Playboy Club. Fort, Cogwell, and their wives were Sammy's guests at the hotel. Again, they asked for the money, and again, Sammy refused. He had to call and get police protection because the Stones showed up to the show en masse. In January 1970, Jeff Fort, Mickey Cogwell, and 15 other Stones were indicted on charges ranging from intimidation and battery to kidnapping and attempted murder. Fort was charged with aggravated kidnapping, conspiracy to commit aggravated kidnapping, and aggravated battery in the December 30th abduction of Willie J. Harris. He was also charged with 4 others for helping Ronald Davis escape from Chicago after he was accused of shooting a police officer. At 8 p.m. on June 23, 1970, 3-year-old Larsina Williams was reported missing by a babysitter. At 5:30 the next morning, her partially dressed body was found in a gangway between 1530 and 1534 East 66th Place. The police were looking for William Hollinger, 42, who lived in a vacant apartment next door to the babysitter. The next day, the commander at the Grand Crossing station received a phone call. It was Jeff Fort. He told the commander that they had the girl's murderer and would turn him over to the police. The gang delivered Hollinger to the police station at 5 p.m. Soon, Jeff would become a fugitive himself. On September 8th, a warrant for Jeff's arrest was issued when he failed to appear in court to answer questions stemming from the January arrest. The cops followed Jeff's girlfriend and spotted her buying an airplane ticket on United Airlines for New York. The cops notified the airline officials and boarded the plane behind her. They had the flight attendant call ahead to New York and had the cops waiting. When they arrived in New York, Janice Connors was allowed to exit the plane and they followed her to a hotel on the east side of Manhattan. There, they found that Jeff had registered under the name Reverend Lawrence Jordan of Las Vegas. When the cops broke into the suite, they surprised Jeff, and he asked, "How'd you find me here?" The cops found $1,800, a passport that said Jeff had been in Barbados when he was supposed to be in court, and other paperwork saying that he was on his way to Algeria. He was taken back to Chicago. In February 1972, he was found guilty of jumping bail. In March of '72, Jeff and 5 other Blackstone Rangers were found guilty of defrauding the federal government and misusing federal funds given to them by the Woodlawn Organization. He was sentenced to 5 years in Leavenworth Prison. Prison for a gang leader was just an inconvenience, and Jeff was able to run his gang of thousands from the prison phone. He got a job on a switchboard, bought time from other inmates, and intimidated the rest. He also converted to Islam and took the name Abdul Malik Kaba. He tried to join the Moorish Science Temple of America, but was rejected because of his criminal background. So Jeff decided to start his own. While Jeff Fort and Bull Hairston were both in jail, 2 factions formed on the streets. One supported Bull regaining leadership when he got out of jail, and the other supported Jeff retaining leadership. On April 16, 1974, Emil Campbell, a Stone who was selling drugs outside of the Stone organization, was fatally shot by 2 men loyal to Jeff Fort. 2 days later, Benny Fort, Jeff's brother, was standing with Bernard Green outside of Benny's apartment at 6450 Kentwood Avenue, when a man hopped out of a car, ran up to Benny, and shots rang out. Benny was shot point-blank range in the neck, but he would survive. 2 days later, Larry Bay, brother of Charles Bay, the number 2 man in the Stones, was shot in the face as he stood in front of his home. He would survive. Police now believe that there was a war between Bull and Jeff. Eugene Bull Hairston was released from jail in 1975. He wanted to regain control of the Stones, but Jeff from prison banned him from the gang. On December 15th, he came out of a building at 7034 Paxton Avenue with Fred Giles, and they began to walk towards the cleaners. Soon after, a gunman stepped from a parked car while his partner stayed behind the wheel. He ran up to the pair and shots rang out. The shooter fired 8 times. Bull was hit twice in the left wrist and once in the back, and ran into the corner store at 71st and Paxton. The gunman ran back to his car and made his escape. Bull will survive and get the message and stay under the radar. Jeff was released from jail in 1976, and he and his wife Diane, along with their 2 kids, moved to Milwaukee where he had family. He enrolled in the community education program at the University of Wisconsin, but he only stayed in the program for 6 months before he returned his focus back to running his organization. In April, he held a meeting and announced that the Black Stone Rangers were no more. From now on, the gang will be known as the El Rukn, which means pillar or foundation in Arabic. He abolished the main 21 and reorganized the gang. He created a chain of command with him at the top. Underneath him were the generals, under them were the ambassadors, and then the L's, or the soldiers. It would be the soldiers who would be responsible for distributing drugs for the gang. Jeff Fort, along with Mickey Cogwell, Bobby Gore of the Vice Lords, Gustav Colon of the Latin Kings, and others combined with several other gangs to form the People's Nation. The Almighty Black Stone Nation, the Four Corner Hustlers, Chicago Gaylords, Latin Counts, Latin Kings, Mickey Cobras, and the Vice Lords. This alliance was formed around the same time that Larry Hoover and other gang leaders in Statesville created the Folks Nation, which contained the Black Gangster Disciples, Black Disciples, Cobras, Latin Disciples, and the Simon City Royals. The People's Nation used a 5-point star, while the Folk Nation used a 6-pointed star. Many members of the Stones were not happy and were not willing to follow Jeff into the El Rukn. One of them was Mickey Cogwell. Jeff considered Mickey a brother, as well as a powerful ally. Now, Jeff did not force the Rukn onto Mickey or to any other leader, and Mickey went off to run his own operation, separate from the Stones, until he was killed in 1977. Some sources say that it was Jeff himself who killed Mickey, but Mickey had become one of the most powerful gangsters in Chicago. He was making money selling drugs, running numbers, and collecting money for the outfit. Jeff denied having anything to do with Mickey's death, and some say it could have been the outfit that took Mickey out. Now, before you guys get in the comments and say that was wrong, I want to clarify. One source says that Jeff was not angry with Mickey and had nothing to do with his death, and another source says that after a meeting, Jeff declared Mickey an enemy of the Rukn and he had to be eliminated. Regardless, Mickey's Cobra Stones blamed Jeff for the death and refused to join the Rukn and split from the Black P Stones and created the Mickey Cobra Street Gang. In 1980, Jeff returned to Chicago and tried to clean up the gang's image. The Rukn started the L Pyramid Maintenance and Management Corporation, as well as several other legitimate businesses. They purchased several properties, including an apartment building in the Kenwood area and a law school. And an old theater at 3954 South Drexel Avenue they converted into a mosque and called it the Rukn Grand Major Temple of America, but it was better known as the Fort. The fort was heavily guarded, and all visitors were checked at the door by security. The main room, known as the Temple, held 100 or so people, and the rest of the building was used as offices for the gang's leaders and a ballroom where the gang held parties. Jeff created a cult-like atmosphere in the temple, with him presiding over meetings in a high back throne set on a pedestal surrounded by posters with his image. Although the Rukn held Islamic principles and on the surface they were against drugs and alcohol, members were often seen smoking weed and drinking in the building. The Rukn tried to get a tax exemption status by declaring that the Rukn was a religious organization, but the Fed said that the Rukn were just a front for the Black P Stone Rangers. Several Rukn in Statesville sued the prison system for the right to hold separate religious services. Their request was denied. In December of 1980, Jeff was arrested after he and 5 other Rukn led the CPD on a high-speed car chase through Chicago. When they finally stopped, the police found $5,000 in the car and a joint. Jeff was arrested for possession and 2 traffic violations. When he and the others arrived at court on Christmas Eve, they arrived in fur coats and coolie hats, 50 deep. The members sat quietly in the courtroom while the other names were called. When Jeff Fort's name was called, all 50 men stood up at attention and refused to sit even after the judge ordered them to do so. He finally had 20 deputies come into the courtroom to restore order. The charges of disorderly conduct were dropped, but the possession charges against Fort would continue. He would eventually be given 4 days in jail and a $500 fine. On Friday, October 9, 1981, the Gangs Crime and Wentworth Violent Crimes Unit raided the building at 6414 Kenwood Avenue with a warrant for a fugitive named Earl Hawkins, 26 years old, who was on the run for killing Willie Dollar Bill Bibbs for selling drugs in Rukn territory earlier that summer on the orders of Jeff Fort. When the cops knocked down the building door, officers saw Jeff running and witnessed him toss a gun and a wad of cash. Police recovered a 9mm pistol and $8,000 from the stairwell and another $4,000 in Jeff's apartment. He and 20 other members were arrested, and Jeff was charged with harboring a fugitive, obstruction of justice, and weapons possession. That Monday, he posted a $6,500 bond. He pleaded not guilty and was released. His entourage escorted him from the criminal courts building like the president, running lights and obstructing traffic until they got back to the fort. Fort and the Rukn ran a multi-state drug operation. They sold Talwin, or pentazocine, and pribenzamine. When the 2 drugs were combined, they acted as a replacement for heroin. The day after he was released on bond, several physicians and pharmacists were arrested and indicted as suppliers of the Rukn. Over 71 people were named in an indictment that was the culmination of 6 months of investigation. Officers posing as addicts spent $26,000 making undercover buys from various Southside locations. During the overnight of February 7, 1982, police again raided the building on Kenwood Street. This time, they had a warrant to look for a dead body they believed was being kept in one of the apartments. When the cops came in, Jeff unleashed his pit bull to prevent the officers from serving the warrant. He called the dog off after they told him they would kill the animal if he didn't. The police did not find a body, but they found a cache of weapons. High-powered rifles, handguns, and shotguns, as well as flak jackets, scopes, and ammunition were found throughout the building. They also confiscated a pound of weed, a quarter ounce of cocaine, and $4,000 in cash. In June of '82, the cops raided the fort at 3947 Drexel Avenue. This time, they came with police dogs, a helicopter, and a fire department hook and ladder unit. When the cops knocked on the door, a man looked out of the peephole and then walked away. After first trying to burn their way through the steel door that guarded the front with a torch, they eventually used the fire department ladders to gain access to the second floor, and 2 officers walked down and opened the front door from inside. The cops found a Thompson submachine gun with a fully loaded drum, a 12-gauge shotgun, .357 Magnum, a semi-automatic pistol, 5 pounds of weed, and 5 ounces of coke. Daniel Adams and Melvin Mays were arrested and charged with illegal possession of narcotics. Jeff and 16 others were arrested again when the police raided the Kenwood building again at 8 a.m. on Saturday, July 17, 1982. They were looking for another fugitive named Willie Hurd. When the cops came, men locked the doors, but the officers forced their way in. When they went to Jeff's apartment, they found over 30 grams of weed in plain sight. Jeff was taken in. The cops found Hurd hiding in the building, and he was arrested too. In June, Jeff turned himself in to start his 90-day sentence for concealing a fugitive. On April 5, 1983, 2 El Rukn were arrested in Tupelo, Mississippi, trying to exchange cocaine for weed. The cops found 7 ounces of coke and about $18,000. This sparked a federal grand jury probe into El Rukn drug activity. On August 13th, Jeff Fort was indicted while he was still in Cook County Jail on federal narcotics and racketeering charges. The Mississippi narcotics agents had wiretaps of phone conversations the 2 men made to a man in Chicago, only identified as Angel. They sought help from the Chicago police, and they told them that Jeff Fort was known as Angel. The police later identified the voice on the wiretap as Jeff, and he was charged along with Henry Timothy and William Doyle with possession and distribution of narcotics, possession with intent to distribute narcotics in interstate commerce, knowingly distributing a controlled substance, and using commercial communication facilities, the telephone, to commit a conspiracy. If convicted on all charges, Jeff was facing 65 years. The trial started in November, and it lasted only a day before Jeff changed his plea to guilty. He would remain free until his sentencing date on November 29th. When that day arrived, Jeff did not show, and an arrest warrant was issued. On December 1st, Jeff was placed on the U.S. Marshal Service's list of the 15 most wanted fugitives. He would eventually turn himself in and receive a 15-year prison sentence. He would be eligible for parole in 1988. In March of 1986, 3 high-ranking El Rukn, Rico Crenshaw, Leon Anderson, and Charles Knox, traveled to Libya under orders from Jeff Fort to meet with former Libyan Prime Minister Muammar Gaddafi and offered to commit terrorist acts including burning or blowing up government buildings, vehicles, and airplanes in America in exchange for $2.5 million. The El Rukn representatives had met with Libyan government officials twice over the previous few months in New York and Panama before finally meeting with Gaddafi in Tripoli. While they were in Tripoli, a call was made to the El Rukn headquarters. It was Crenshaw, and Jeff Fort was on his personal line that he called several times a day from the correctional institution at Bastrop, Texas. The Gaddafi call was put on speaker, and Jeff and Gaddafi held a conversation according to a witness. Jeff was transferred from Texas to Chicago for the trial. While he was in the Metropolitan Correctional Center awaiting his trial, a judge gave a ruling barring Jeff from being within arm's reach of any telephone in the facility, essentially cutting Jeff off from his gang. During the trial, it came out that the El Rukn planned to kill a Milwaukee official named Dan Brannigan, and were looking to do so in spectacular fashion to impress Gaddafi. The FBI caught wind through wiretaps and set up a sting operation. FBI agent Willie Hewlin was introduced to an El Rukn named Alan Knox. Hewlin told Knox that he had a friend on an army base who had stolen a lot of property. Did he know anyone who was interested in buying anything? Knox said that he was interested in buying grenade launchers, bulletproof vests, and infrared field goggles. He also wanted a rocket launcher, the type Dirty Harry used in the Enforcer movie. The Law rocket carried a warhead capable of penetrating 12 inches of steel and destroying a bunker. Knox reached out to Fort for approval, and Jeff okayed the deal. Knox traveled to Lansing, Michigan, and purchased 1 Law rocket for $18,500. The rocket was taken to 6414 Kenwood Avenue. To no surprise, the feds raided the place and found the rocket. They also raided the fort and found 37 firearms, including 3 submachine guns, 1 equipped with a silencer, along with rifles, carbines, and handguns. When the Libyan deal failed, evidence showed that the El Rukn reached out to the Ayatollah Khomeini of Iran to see if he was interested. In court, recorded conversations between the El Rukn and Iranian officials were played. Jeff Fort and the rest would be found guilty of conspiracy to obtain money from a foreign government in return for committing acts of terrorism, and was sentenced to 80 years behind bars. While Jeff was locked up, he got more bad news. He was now being charged with ordering the death of Willie Dollar Bill Bibbs back in 1981. On September 22nd, 1988, Eugene Bull Hairston was in the Ida B. Wells projects where he had a small drug operation. A little after 12:30 a.m., he was walking down the 3800 block of South Vincennes Avenue. A bodyguard followed him and kept an eye on him from across the street. Out of nowhere, a third man ran up and shots rang out. The man shot Bull several times before the bodyguard came across the street and put more shells in the Bull. The two men then ran off and dumped their weapons in the separate abandoned lots. Bull was taken to the Michael Reese Hospital where he was dead on arrival, with wounds in his head, chest, abdomen, and right leg. Fort, who was to begin his murder trial in a few days, denied having anything to do with his old friend's death. In November 1988, Jeff Fort was found guilty of conspiring to murder Willie Bibbs, and he received another 70 years in jail. Jeff Fort is currently serving out his 168-year prison sentence in the ADX Florence Supermax prison in Florence, Colorado. He is 78 years old as of November 2025, and the gang he started still exists in cities across America. And that, my friends, is the skinny on Jeff Fort. I hope you guys enjoyed the story as much as I enjoyed telling it. I hope you learned some things about Jeff and the Black Peace Stones you didn't know. If this is your first time here and you like what we do over here at A Few Bad Men, you want to join the gang, first thing you got to do is you got to whack that subscribe button. Second thing you got to do is you got to break that thumb like it owes you money. Third thing you got to do is you got to ring that bell and set it for all notifications so you don't miss anything. All right. I want to give a special shout out to all the members and the Patreons. I know that it's only $2 or $5 a month to you, but every penny helps towards the production of the video, and I really appreciate you guys. So if you guys want to help the channel out and get to see some of the videos I can't show you on YouTube because of YouTube policies, go over to the Patreon and get yourself a Patreon membership or join the YouTube membership. If you just want to slide an envelope upstairs to the boss to help the channel run smooth, the PayPal link is down below. All right, so this has been A Few Bad Men. Keep your nose clean and don't take any wooden nickels. I see you in the funnies.